Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I have my, I'm just writing. I have my perspective all down, and
Yeah.
I know where I'm coming from with my argument. And I think I'm sure it's biblical. And I
So,
think it refutes some of
yeah.
the issues that people are wrestling with,
So before we go live, do you want to say anything bad about Ward Crocker? I'm just kidding. We're live now. Don't say anything.
well, let me say something bad. I could say something bad about Ward Crocker. Man,
Yeah.
that is one. Well,
No, see. Yeah.
he's one ugly guy.
Oh, that was a
Yes.
low blow.
He is. He has a face only a wife could love.
And his wife does love his face, so that's all right. It's okay because you only need.
He
That's what I
does,
figure as a
man.
dude. I only need one woman to love me anyway,
He no,
and
he
that's my
does. No, he's
wife. That's all I'm shooting for.
yeah. That's
If I
it.
got that,
That's
that's
it.
all. That's all I need.
That's it, man.
Yeah, so
That
that's all
guy
right.
there.
That's success.
Yep.
You know,
You only need to hook one.
that's right. We can't all be Wesley Snipes or Brad Pitt.
Wesley Snipes. Where's he handsome at? On the bottom of his feet?
I don't know. Well, he always gets the ladies. Oh
Well,
man,
yeah.
I hating on Wesley.
I'm not hating.
Yeah.
I'm just being honest. Just tell the truth. That's all we do here.
All right. Well, we are live off the cuff, and I think I'm pretty interested in today's topic. I avoid the word excited only because, man, I don't know if it's exciting, but I think it is a challenging one for the church. What
Yeah.
are we
Yeah.
supposed to do in response to all this COVID stuff? How are we to worship? What does that look like? What does faithfulness to God look like? And what does honoring the state? And there's just so many challenges that we're going to face in these coming weeks and months, really, because these decisions are not clear cut and set in stone. I mean, I think my big challenge I see, Leroy, is that like every state seems to have a different standard. There's not any scientific standard of when we're reopening.
Right.
This is all an art. It's all politics. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I just mean the politicians have to make a choice. Some are making them for probably better motives than others, or some are making them for motives that are maybe, some may be good motives, some may be bad. So I don't even mean politics in a bad way, but that's, talking about the public sphere. They got to make decisions and guide us. And the church has got to figure out where we fit in, man. So I think it's an interesting discussion for sure. I know you're probably, I think you were saying before, I don't know if you're just tired of reading for your thesis writing or you're tired of reading for COVID stuff.
Oh, my thesis writing.
Just that's
Oh,
okay.
the COVID stuff. Look, it is. The COVID itself isn't fascinating, but the questions that it has evoked, not only in the political sphere but in our religious life, are incredibly important.
Yeah.
And I think that we really need men in the church to be mature, to work through the text, to think about the people who have gone before us, who've actually been in situations like this before, and glean from their wisdom. And we need to speak, I think, very clearly now. I mean, I think we've talked about this a number of times. I've heard more people, not just educated people, or not just uneducated people, but educated people, not just old people, but young people, not just short but tall people.
Yeah.
Everybody is saying we don't know who to trust right now. Everybody. I mean, it is amazing to hear that spoken so loud. And for me, as far as our political sphere is concerned, I think the media has let our country down in the most important and egregious way. They've let us down because they're the referees. They're the ones who are supposed to call the balls and strikes and look out for our interests, and they have let us down. So the COVID questions, I think, like you said, are the big ones.
They got way too embroiled in politics, and now's a time when politics shouldn't be a factor, but there's just way too much getting decided based on who wins politically and who loses politically, as opposed to what's good for the common good. And I think that's what we got away as we look to open the church. And you said that a second ago about listening to sort of the wisdom of people that come before. That's kind of a good way. I want to lead in with this question and then read an interesting quote and see what you think. So here was the question I kind of first thought of. In the case of a public health crisis, is the church obligated to obey the government without question? And so I think that's sort of my summary of a lot of the discussions I've been reading on Facebook and Twitter and all the other places where people are engaging, the dialogue that's happening in response to articles that are getting published. I think that's the crux of one of those things. It's like, well, hey, if this was a different circumstance, and people want to argue that. So it seems like a good thing. And I came across this quote, a couple quotes from John Locke. In a letter concerning toleration and concerning civil government. So the thing about Locke, people have to keep in mind is, and this, he's the father of liberalism, which isn't necessarily what we mean by liberal politically today, although traditionally it is, but it's not a derogatory word, let's put it that way. It's rooted in the principles of this idea of that there's life, liberty, property, consent, and this idea of social contract were sort of big for Locke, and this idea of liberalism and the thinking. And here's what he said. I mean, he was very influential in the founding, so I think this is an interesting crossover to this discussion today about what, answering that question, what's our obligation? So Locke said this, these religious societies I call churches, and these I say the magistrate ought to tolerate, for the business of these assemblies of the people is nothing but what is lawful for every man in particular to take care of. I mean the salvation of their souls. Nor in this case is there any difference between the national church and other separated congregations. So he's talking about churches that might be more nationally approved, as opposed to those that are sort of on the separatist churches in his time that were out on the fringes. He says, but as in every church, there are two things especially to be considered: the outward form of the rites of worship and the doctrines and articles of faith. And so I think that's where we're at today a little bit, which is why this struck me. We're talking about what can we do for church? What does that look like? And then doctrine of faith. He said, these things must be handled each distinctly, that so the whole matter of toleration may be more clearly be understood. Concerning outward worship, I say in the first place that the magistrate has no power to enforce by law, either in his own church or much less in another, the use of any rites or ceremonies whatsoever on the worship of God. And this not only because these churches are free societies, but because whatsoever is practiced in the worship of God is only so far justifiable as it is believed by those practiced it to be acceptable unto him. So whosoever is not done with that assurance of faith is neither well in himself nor is acceptable to God. To impose such things therefore upon any people contrary to their own judgment is an effort to command them to offend God, which, considering that the end of religion is to please him, and that liberty is essentially necessary to that end, appears to be absurd beyond expression. So my take is, what he's saying is, look, if a government's telling a church, hey, you can't do this certain ritual and worship, this is a way you can't do it. Maybe we'll look some stuff later. Like churches, you shouldn't sing because that can spread COVID, or you can't gather in groups of, whatever. Maybe what Locke is saying, and I'm not saying, this determines our actions fully by itself. I just think it's a consideration in this process of, he's saying that we have to be careful that he's worried that if we impose it on churches and reduce the liberty of churches, that it's only the first step towards eroding liberty of all peoples. And I think that's his major concern. So what do you think about his
exactly right
quote there? What do you think?
I think coming from him, I think it's absolutely fascinating. Locke said that the reason why we gather together in the very first place is to protect property. We get together to protect ourselves, to protect our rights. And it seems to me that this is consistent with one of the major points of his thinking, that one of those rights is to freely associate in worship. And I don't think that we ought to be, I think that we ought to be wise, right? I think that, that God favors us. God, is pleased when we respect those authorities who are put over us. But the history of Scripture, not anyone else, but the history of Scripture shows, the history of it, the sweep of it shows that the people of God determine how they would worship God. Now, we can look to men and women who have gone before us, and I think There are a lot of wise people who have spoken. Spurgeon has a particularly relevant quote on this, who, about how we ought to think about pestilence and our position and what we ought to do in pestilence. But for the church people, the history and scope of the scriptures are that the people of God determine how God determines how the people would worship, and the people in obedience to him worship them. So I think if Locke is saying that he supports that point, then I wholeheartly agree with Locke.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing here in California that came up for folks not in the area, they may not know. So down here in San Diego, they had put a limit on the casinos, and they were pretty forceful that you can't open up the casinos.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the tribal people said, "Well, hey, wait a second, we're a sovereign nation, and you can't tell us to do that." And then I heard on the radio the other day all the people came out, the city councilmen, all the kind of critical people there, and they're like, "Hey, we really just changed our mind on this. We respect the sovereignty of the Indian tribes," and it was funny because they went there. They went like, "Oh, and the white people have a bad record of telling the Indians what to do and how to control themselves. So we're not going to say anything about this." So at this point, there's no science involved. This is a purely political response. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's like they backed off because they realized that they didn't have technically the rights to impose that. But all I could help think was, not only is the church sovereign, there's a separation that we love to say between church and state,
enshrined in the Constitution.
Yeah, so there's a constitutional separation between the church and the state, to use Jefferson's later words. And I'm okay with that phrase. I think we could abuse that phrasing, but let's just stick with it for here. But if they're going to acknowledge the sovereignty of the Indians to run a casino in their tribal lands, then on what basis do they impinge on the sovereignty of the church to say you can't gather and worship? Is that do you think that's a fair analogy?
Oh my gosh! Look, we don't even need to point out the hypocrisy of their amending of their rules, the so-called science. We don't even need to point it out. We just need to look at what they've done. What they've shown is their rules are not based on data and science. They're based on the sensitivities of certain people. Elon Musk said to California, "I'm leaving. I'm taking my 30,000 jobs out of here." One California congressman, laced him with some expletives. But guess what? He opened his doors the next day. And what did they do? They amended the rules, which tells us, my point is this so-called data and science that they're telling us that they're basing it on. No, it's not. It's money and it's influence and it's power. And my only point is that we in the church ought to take that into our consideration as to how they are dealing with us. It is a factor into how they are dealing with us. It may not be the determinative factor, but it's one that we ought to think about and say, is this consistent?
Check out this next quote from Locke, because this goes exactly to what we're talking about here. Almost like I planned it, but I didn't, because this is cool. This is good. So he says this, Locke says, "By this we see the difference there is between the church and the commonwealth." So the church and the state, essentially, right? "So whatsoever is lawful in the commonwealth cannot be prohibited by the magistrate in the church. Whatsoever is permitted unto any of us subjects for their ordinary use, neither can nor ought to be forbidden by him to any sect of people for their religious uses. If any man may lawfully take bread or wine, either sitting or kneeling in his own house, the law ought not to abridge him of the same liberty in his religious worship. Though in the church the use of bread and wine may be different, and there be applied to the mysteries of faith and the rites of divine worship, but those things that are prejudicial to the commonweal of a people in their ordinary use, and therefore forbidden by law, those things ought not to be permitted to churches in the sacred rites. Only the magistrate ought always to be very careful that he do not misuse his authority to the opposition of any church under pretense of public good."
Right, and
isn't that interesting?
That is very interesting. And look, I think in the very beginning of this, we all, despite the consternation of some, said, "Hey, this is a serious situation. We need to take a step back and be wise. We don't want to, we want to be good shepherds. The good shepherds lead their sheep into green pastures where there's fruitfulness and there's health. So we want to be those kind of shepherds." But after we've sat back for the last month and looked at the arbitrary nature of the decisions that they make, I think wise people in the church ought to say, we need to sit back and now consider our own counsel. With respect to the magistrate, we want to respect that. God tells us to respect that, but he does not tell us to always obey it. And as I said, we can look back at, Shipra and Puah, the two Hebrew midwives who were told to kill the Hebrew slaves, but they didn't. We can look back at Rahab, who was asked by the governing authorities which way did the spies go, and she did not tell them which way that they went. We can look back at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were told how they ought to worship by Nebuchadnezzar or be killed, and they decided to die. We can look at Daniel, who was told not to worship, and he was thrown in the lion's den. And then we can even look at Paul in Acts chapter 16, who was beaten, and then after he was released, he said, "I'm a Roman citizen. Is it right to beat a Roman citizen? Is it lawful?" And he challenged them. If we're supposed to take this wooden reading of Romans 13, those instances they're all wrong, and they're not. We have to look at how those are used.
I think that Paul one you bring up is really actually kind of critical, though, because if you think about this, he's saying he was using his citizenship rights, his rights as a Roman citizen, to correct the actions that were oppressing him and keeping him from his gospel mission. And so I think that there's a false dichotomy in that. Again, this isn't our only consideration. We'll look at some other stuff, but I think this is an important thing to distinguish: is when the church saying, "Hey, the state is violating our rights as a church to worship," that is not unbiblical or unfaithful. I think what you just brought up there is that even Paul called upon his rights as a citizen to kind of keep advancing his mission. And he said, "Hey, look, I'm not going to, I'm not going to take a beating just because you want to do it." And, he said, no, I'm going to call on my rights as a citizen. And so we have these certain freedoms and they're constitutional. And I don't think they should be ignored, even in the case of a crisis, because there's larger issues at stake beyond COVID that will come. And if we sacrifice and give up those rights now, there's a danger that we've allowed the camel's nose under the tent, so to speak.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And that Paul in Acts, that Paul scripture in Acts chapter 16 is the rightful outworking of protest. He said, "You had the right to beat me if I broke the law." That's you're the magistrate. You're no terror to good works. You had the right to beat me if I broke the law, but I didn't break the law. And then you didn't even consider my rights as a citizen. Now I'm going to hold you accountable to your own laws. So that's exactly what he does there. And that's a model for us to think through in this decision. Whether you are pro-open or pro-closed, it's a model for us to think through, which is that we cannot read Romans 13 in a wooden, we obey the government no matter what it says way. That is not how it ought to be read. And I don't think, and Paul is an example, the guy who wrote it, that is not how it ought to be read. I mean, I've looked at Romans 13, and there's so many clues as to what government ought to look like, the purpose of government, that it's good, that it's righteous, that it's no terror to good deeds. And we ought to respect that. And even when the government is wrong, we ought to hold it accountable to its laws. That's what a good citizen is. That's what a good citizen does. So I think now, I'm of two minds somewhat. I think that COVID is serious. I think that, I went from it not being serious to now I understand its serious nature. But I also think, that we have this great history, this great history of as Americans and Christians who sacrifice. I listened to a guy, and just let me drone on for 1 minute.
I'm only going to give you like another 30 seconds to drone on before I fall asleep over here.
Okay, good. But this is going to be good, though. I listened to this guy give this talk, and I wasn't really enthused about his talk until he got to the last point, and he said how old people are being left to die, or people are dropping their family members off in the hospital and never seeing them this side of heaven. And I thought to myself, that is not in keeping with the history and the faithfulness of the men and women who have gone before us, who worked in the midst of pestilence, who sacrificed themselves so that these people wouldn't die by themselves, and they would have human touch, and they would have an opportunity to hear the gospel. But here we are, COVID, I need to stay cloistered in my house. I'm afraid. No, it's not who we are.
Yeah, I want to get to that. Christians. I want to get to that question in a little bit too, that idea of the purpose and the role of church and what is our moral obligation. Let me just do this one story real quick as to close off this little segment. So there's a Washington Times story that said, the title is sort of, "It's Time for the Churches to Open Wide" was the title. And it says, the Department of Justice just issued a statement suggesting Virginia acted above and beyond its rightful call of COVID-19 government duty by closing churches to more than 10 people while allowing some private businesses to host untold numbers of shoppers. And then it goes on to just say it's not okay. I think that's actually what Locke was saying in his stuff, is that you can't have one rule for the public and another rule for the church. And so when that happens, we're violating, not just our constitutional kind of rights and freedoms, but there's a natural law of the way we view ourselves, that we're seeing the church being isolated, that is dangerous, and the church needs to be aware of that. Again, it's not our sole factor.
Not just isolated, but not inessential. Not isolated, and that's the whole thing. Inessential. I'm so frustrated with that one. Inessential. That's what they're saying. You're not essential.
Yeah. There's a political agenda there to label the church non-essential. It's different to say, hey, here's guidelines for everybody, but to actually label the church as non-essential versus essential, then the state is making a decision they're overstepping their sovereignty of what the state is allowed to say about the church and the gatherings of the church. Again, it's not our only factor as leaders in the church, but it is something we have to be aware of in all of our decision making. So that's our next question then that I kind of came up. And again, just reading everybody's post stuff, this is where this question comes from. Or at least it made me think of this. Does the church have a moral obligation to start meeting again? See, I think we're all saying about like, we're letting, the COVID and the science drive our decision making, but we're not having, what I don't see happening is anybody having a really good discussion of the ethics of, are we doing a disservice to the church by keeping our doors closed? Or are we actually failing in our moral duty as leaders to tell people to stay at home and just doing everything online? So here's where it's interesting.
That's a tough question.
Yeah, here's a Harvard study. This is out of Harvard. There's a research led by T.H. Chan School of Public Health. The study was published online in Journal of American Medicine, JAMA, Journal of American Medical. I'm drawing a blank on what that JAMA is. Anyway, so JAMA Psychiatry was the specific part of JAMA they did in. So religion may be a social detriment of health. Religion may be a social determinant of health. And previous research has shown that attending religious services may be associated with a lower risk of various factors related to despair, including heavy drinking, substance misuse, and social suicidality. I didn't know that was a word. The study authors noted that religious participation may serve as an important antidote to despair and an asset for sustaining a sense of hope and meaning. They also wrote that religion may be associated with strengthened psychosocial resilience by fostering a sense of peace and positive outlook and promoting social connectedness. And they even go on to make so there's some clear implications in COVID. So I read that, this is the science. And saying, look, okay, there's one side of the science that says, yes, we can get infected and we may risk. And there's some people who are high risk categories that may suffer because of that. But I'm not just talking about opening up for mass public worshiping. I'm talking about pastors visiting homes, I'm talking about lay leaders, doing small group gatherings where there's a social connectedness. And according to this study, if I read this right, then the answer to that question is there's a moral obligation I think the church has to meet together. Now, it may not look like Sunday, and that's a separate question, but to totally take everything online out of, fear of COVID and the risk that comes with that is not weighing also the risks that we are imposing on the congregation and the people by stepping out of their lives. I think we've unintentionally bought into the idea that the church is non-essential. The gathering together is non-essential.
Not essential. Oh my gosh, listen. No, that encapsulates the question of our day. Now, I remember, and this is, I'm kind of offbeat with these things, but I remember there was a school shooting. I think it was in Paducah, Kentucky, and they asked one of the kids why he shot all these kids, and I've been searching for this quote for a long time, and he said, "Well, you told us." This is what the kid said. "You told us that we came from nothing." His point is, if we came from nothing, then there's really no meaning as to why or why not to do this. I mean, this is where our lives are not really all that meaningful. See, that kid was living out the outworking of his worldview. Its outwork of his worldview is that we're made from nothing and we're going nowhere. Who cares about how this works out now? The church is not that way, is it? Yeah. The church needs to live out its mandate, which means, and I think this is again why COVID has really captured us, is it's pressed death in on us, hasn't it? It's pressed the notion that every time I go outside my door, I could get a disease that will kill me. Now, all of a sudden, that question that is always around us all the time, but is not pressed on us in the way that COVID has done, has caused us to kind of, in some ways, I want to say, reveal what we really think about this life, which is, and for some people, preserving life above all else is the most important thing. Now, in some church leaders, that view will prevail. And I'm not castigating people for holding that view. I'm not trying to downgrade them, because that for them may be one of the most motivating factors. I'm not trying to, put them down. I'm just saying that's a view. Another view is that I'm not made for this world. And the most important thing about me is I fulfill the mission, whatever that mission is that God gave me, whether it's COVID, whether it's rain, sleet, snow, pandemic, earthquake, whatever. And for some people, that is.
And that's, you're on to something that's really important people have to recognize. So COVID is just a new thing that we're not used to building into our psychology of risk. Yes. But the truth is, when we tell people, hey, get in your car, drive to this place of gathering, we could save tens of thousands of lives every year if we said the speed limit was set at 10 miles an hour.
Stay home. Tens
of thousands of people will live. When we gather together, we have no idea who comes through our doors. Somebody coming through those doors at any point, not just under COVID, could be ill with any kind of disease or sickness that they could easily pass along.
Dylan Roof might show up at your church one day.
When you gather together, there's nutty people that are going to come in with a gun. It's a genuine risk. Now, it may not be as likely as COVID. But it's certainly, I think we've just learned to, we're comfortable to a certain degree of risks that we're used to. And I think the question we as leaders have to ask is my response to this that I'm really concerned about safety, or is it just I'm fearful about the newness of this thing and I haven't adjusted psychologically to that? And I'm not saying that everybody has.
You're right.
I'm just saying that's a question we have to faithfully ask ourselves.
That's a fair statement. It is a totally fair question. I just think, for me, I learned, what it means about what mission means originally in the Marine Corps. The one thing about Marines is, and not everybody's a Marine. Everybody can be a Marine. I get that. I mean, not everybody can be as good as we are, the United States Marines. I get that totally. But one thing about Marines is we believe in the mission. And when you go out on a mission, your job is to accomplish that mission. Yeah. But we rehearse the stories of the men who've gone out on mission and have done great things. And we rehearse the stories of the men who've made sacrifice and women who've made sacrifice on those missions. And we rehearse those stories because we want to tell future generations of Marines that this is what it means. This is the thing that you've committed to. This is the so-called band of brothers and sisters that exemplify what it means to be Marines. Yeah. And we used to have that ethos in the church, and what COVID is showing us that ethos may still be there in some places, but it's not there totally in the way that it was. And because again, what did Schaefer talk to us about is affluence. We don't really suffer all that much in America, and we're not used to suffering, and we're not used to sacrificing in the same way as those
Yeah.
people who have gone before us.
I just asked somebody, I was just having a Facebook exchange literally like 8 minutes before this started because we were still not on yet. And I was asking this because somebody was posting about like, fears about like if you sing, if there's singing going on in the congregation, there's studies that say this could pass it. And so maybe we gather, but we don't allow congregational singing, all these other kind of things. And I meant this, it was a sincere question I had, just trying to process that. It's like, because as a pastor, I say, well, if I allow people, if I say, hey, come gather together, am I exposing them to additional risk? And I said, think about the church in China or in many places in the Middle East. When they gather together, there's a risk, not just of being arrested by the pastor, but every person in there could be arrested, imprisoned, executed in secret. So every person there is at risk with every time the church gathers. I mean, every, not just based on age, demographic, and mitigating other health issues. I mean, they'll come in and they'll take everybody. And so I think, the way I'm trying to process it at least is that I think if that's our driving question, I can't let people take the risk, I got to protect them. Part of me says that's not what drives us to be together at the church. We're not there to protect people. We're there to worship God. And I think, and I don't think that's a false dichotomy. I think that there's a sense in that. I think we're become so, like you said, just dulled to the sense of safety that we have. We're so inured by the easiness of our lives that we've forgotten that church is a risk for some people around the globe today. Right now, it's always a life and choice decision, yet they gather. And so I'm trying to wrestle with those things.
No, it's a fair question. Up until about 8 weeks ago, the word ecclesia always meant gathering together.
Yeah.
8 weeks since, it just means getting on the internet. That's a new definition of ecclesia. That was never. It's not the same.
I'm a tech guy. Love technology.
Before. Yeah, love it.
Online church is not church.
Never envisioned by the people that have gone before us. Never envisioned by the people that have gone before us. And this new definition for some people is becoming I got into a discussion a few weeks ago. This is the way that people want to do church going forward, and I think it's madness. Yeah, it's absolute madness.
And remember what even the Harvard study says. Look, gathering together is what helps people overcome a lot of those negative psychological traits, the loneliness, isolation, the habitual use of toxic chemicals or alcohol to sort of help dull their senses in these things. Those who gather together on a regular basis are much healthier psychologically human beings because we're holistic. There's a spiritual side, there's an emotional side, there's a physical side, and we can't survive as human beings. This does not count as much. It's better than nothing, I suppose, but it is not the gathering. And so I think the question I'd ask more rhetorically at this point is that, and then we'll move to this next question I have for you, for us to talk about. So considering the suffering caused by the lockdowns, note, not caused by COVID, as every headline keeps saying, which is a side point that irritates me to no end. This virus has caused people to do. No, it's our political choices, not the virus. It's our response that has caused these things. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't mean it's a wrong response. I'm just saying let's call it what it is.
Let's be honest. Yeah, let's be honest.
Yes. So how should the church respond? That's what we have to faithfully ask, is if the lockdowns cause additional suffering, suicide, they're saying at least 250,000 people in the next few months may enter starvation levels globally because these lockdowns have shut down supply chains. They've hindered food production in some ways. So the church, I'm going to say, I'm not saying that going back to meet and gathering is going to stop people from starving, but at some point, what is the church modeling to the world when we're afraid to gather together? Are we allowing these lockdowns to continue because we haven't been a voice for saying that the suffering that we're saying we prevent is far less than the suffering that's going to happen because we're not speaking out? And that's my concern is, and I think that's what we have to ask ourselves that question.
That's a fair statement. People are saying, hey, y'all Christians, y'all love your life just like we love ours. Don't be talking to me about, some future existence where where you're going to go and be with your Savior who loves you and who's going to say, well done, good and faithful. Don't be saying that stuff to me. Y'all are staying in your house. I don't see y'all out. And that doesn't mean that some Christians aren't out doing this, because I know some churches are doing magnificently well. This is not a blanket statement, because some churches are doing magnificently well in this. I mean, and I've talked to several, in the course of my job, I've talked to several people who have just so blessed me with their sacrifice for people. But I'm talking about the average person who attends the church, who's sitting in their homes, who is listening to that television and those ridiculous and just negative all day long, and not balancing it or fighting it by their real identity and identifying with Christ, even unto death.
Yeah.
Even unto death.
Yeah. Think about that. What you're saying is like, the church has, I think, done a pretty good job, as far as I can tell from stuff I've read. They've been critical in feeding lines, creating lines where people could be fed, and doing all these, and caring for people and the physical needs. But Jesus said, man does not live by bread alone. Right. And so I think if we're not afraid to go out and do those things and engage the world to care for their physical needs, what does it say if we're afraid to gather together to satisfy our worship needs and the command of our God to worship together? I think that has to be evaluated. Here's the next question. Let's move it along this way. So if we choose to meet, let's just say people we choose to meet, what does that look like? I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean, okay, we're going to be in a big building together. Maybe there's other ways to do that. I grant that this is not, meeting doesn't define one thing. And that's, I think, really critical when we look at that. But here's a couple things. I know these quotes have gone around from Richard Baxter. A lot of people he was one of the more influential English Puritans in the 17th century. His legacy actually is, ironically, as a nonconformist who sought unity. So, I think I just lost Leroy there. So hopefully he'll come back on here. So I'm going to redial him, and hopefully he's able to jump back on. So as we look at what Baxter said there. I think we got Leroy back. I got you back there. You are, Leroy. I got you.
I'm back.
So there we got Richard Baxter. And he's got this. So he has a couple questions, and I won't read all of it. I just sort of give a preface, and I'll post these on the blog at morethancake.org after, when I have the liner notes. You can see the full quotes and read these things. But the questions he was asked, really interesting. Question asked to him: may we omit church assemblies on the Lord's Day if the magistrate forbid them? And the answer: it is one thing to forbid them for a time upon some special cause, as an infection by pestilence, fire, war, and another to forbid them statedly or profanely. In other words, on an ongoing basis. And then the next question right after this: must we obey the magistrate if he only forbid us worshiping God in such a place or country or such a number or the like? He says we must distinguish between such determination of circumstances, mode, or accidents as plainly destroy the worship of the worship or the end, and such as not. So basically, he's just saying, well, hey, there's different circumstances. We have to weigh those. And I think that's a fair thing that we should do today. And he gives some guidance on that. But if we choose to gather, I think that speaks to that we have to look at the circumstance and say, what does that look like? And what is the right way to do that? So I'm sure you've put some thought into that. If we're going to gather, how do we do it?
What's fascinating about that is, if you look at the entrepreneurs, people who are struggling to keep their businesses open and their livelihood, they've taken into account what the government has said about social distancing, wearing masks, all the health advice given by them. But they've also thought through ways to continue to do their job, like in the gym and the grocery stores. They've also thought through how to do their job in such a way that satisfy that. Now, I'm not satisfied with people simply saying, we should continue to meet at the drive-in in our cars. I mean, that's one way. I mean, that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
But that's for some people, that's a solution. But if you can go to the grocery store and go to work at a grocery store for 8 hours, and not just be in the grocery store for 8 hours, stocking shelves, touching cans that thousands of people touch every single day. If you can stand in line to get into Trader Joe's or to get into Michael's.
Yeah.
If these young kids, who I'm just magnificently impressed by, can get out of bed and go to work with a mask and serve you fast food every day, if you can go to the liquor store, if you can go and do all these things that normal people do every day to make sure that we have service, we can think through how to have a church service.
Yeah.
That may mean we have more services. That may mean we have, an 8, a 10, or whatever. We have more services. That may mean that we tell people that we need to be distant in the pews. Goodness gracious! If people can serve their God of mammon or whatever, we should be able to do the same thing with our own God.
Or why not just simply say, look, a lot of churches have small group environments. You say, look, on Sunday morning, we're going to gather in 100 places as opposed to one place. Mm-hmm. And you're going to go and gather in those places, and everybody's going to maybe tune in, and the pastor's going to give a little message. We're going to sing together. But then you're going to spend time in community and prayer and do all those things together. I don't see a problem with that. Matter of fact, the more I really have read and prepped for this week, the more I think, I'm going to do that. Now, here's where I would say there's caution to take, and we'll get more into this too, like specifics. It doesn't mean we have to be unwise. So, our home, our in-laws are in our home, and they're elderly, and they're in those high-risk groups just because of their age. My father-in-law had heart surgery years ago, which probably puts him in a risk category in and of itself and beyond his age. So I wouldn't open up my home to it. Not because I don't want to, and not because I'm scared, but because I've got to consider my in-laws. That's just not wise to expose them to that. But I would take my kids and my family and go to somebody else's house and worship together in a small group. I think that's completely acceptable and healthy at this point, considering all the stuff you just said about what's happening. Again, go back to Locke. If it's okay for everywhere outside the church, it can't have a different standard for the church. I go to Costco and there's more than 10 people in that store, and I walk down the aisles and I'm exposed to 60, 70, 80, 100 people, however many that is. And we're all wearing masks, but so what? I mean, they're not really going to do much anyway, but, okay, I'm doing it, whatever. But that would be no more than if I sat in a living room with a bunch of believers.
The interesting thing is we're not going to learn any more about this disease. The only thing that we're going to benefit from going forward is therapeutics or vaccine. But there's no more, for the average person, there's no more learning we need to do in how to protect ourselves. We need to wash our hands consistently, 20 seconds at a time. We need to wear a mask when we go outside. We need to be socially distanced. There's what else are they going to tell us to do from this point? There's nothing more they can tell us to do. So the next question for us is we need to figure out how to live with COVID until it's gone. And the more they keep us locked up in our houses and afraid, we're not learning how to live with COVID. We're learning how to hide from COVID.
Well, here's the thing the church is. I mean, there's, COVID is one thing caused by one strand of the coronavirus. I heard today, and I haven't validated this, but I did hear from what I thought was a pretty good source that they have never developed a vaccine for any strain of the coronavirus.
That's true.
Influenza virus, we have plenty of vaccines, the flu vaccine that people get, although I took it a few years ago and got sick after, so not a big fan. But my in-laws take that, a lot of older people, at-risk groups, again, take those flu vaccines. But my understanding is we've never had one for a coronavirus. So if the standard is we are never going to open, like in LA, we are never going to open until there is a vaccine. I mean, he said that, whoa, dude. That would be 18 to 20 months at least, probably, even though Trump thinks something by the end of this year. But I don't know about that. But even then, we're talking about developing a vaccine for something that has never been done before. So, okay, if we get it, that's great. But what is our standard then if we say, because what happens with the next coronavirus strain comes along, that one doesn't, are we going to do it all over again? I think that's an impossible standard to live lives by. And it's just,
you can't.
The economic devastation on real lives, people starving to death is real.
It's insane. Listen.
Yeah.
Some people are it's just frustrating to listen to because getting out of bed and leaving your house is a risk. 40,000 people die every year who drive cars. There are 300,000 malpractice suits where people die or are heinously injured in hospital um, visits every year. On a bad year, 60,000 people die from the flu, or 30,000 people die from the flu. Me and Margie were talking today. I wonder if people actually described how people died from the flu, the symptoms and the way that they've explained with COVID, how similar, would they be? And I think maybe that's a good question to consider for some people. How do people die? How's it that they die with the flu? What does that look like? And is it the same as COVID? And again, I'm not trying to minimize COVID. I know that it is not the flu. I know that.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of things that can kill you. Cancer kills you. Just a ton of things that are going to kill us.
Yeah.
Why this one thing is so different now that we've had some distance and now that we've gotten more knowledge about it. These people who are keeping people locked down, I think it's just political. I hate to say
and
that,
I feel the more I read about it this week, I think the more I was interested in doing this, because I think that there's this next couple weeks is going to be a big change. So for example, here in California, I got a news article here, a group of 500 some pastors have already signed a thing that they're going to open up May 31st, regardless of what Newsom says. We are opening up. Now, but here's the thing. It's funny because the headlines, Christians, be careful of this, because the newspapers are trying to paint it as Christians are being careless and unthoughtful, and they're going to cause this virus to spread. They're looking to blame Christians for this no matter what.
Sounds familiar.
But if you read the articles and the quotes from these guys, what they're saying is, look, you can't keep us from gathering. This is wrong. This is not right, because you've allowed others to gather. We are still, like in the case of this group in California, it's like buried like 14 paragraphs down. They're still reaching out to the governor's office. They're trying to say, what are the best guidelines you have for it? But they're saying, look, you can't say we're not non-essential anymore. You can't say we're non-essential to gather together anymore. And the same in Chicago. I've got another story here. This is a group of Romanian Christian congregations. They're saying, look, we're starting to meet no matter what, and we're not going to do this. But if you read down again, you find there's a lot more nuance when they're saying that. We're still going to try to do social distancing. We're just not going to be limited to groups of 10. They're just saying that's ridiculous, because nobody else is limited to groups of 10 in their different gathering places. So I think all you see now is that there's a group of well thought out leaders that are saying we're going to gather, but we want to just do good public health guidelines, because we don't want to take unreasonable, silly risk. But at the same time, to impose one set of rules on the church and another on public is just not going to wash anymore.
Right. No, that's yeah. And look, and just to be fair, I mean, I go back and forth in my mind on this, but I just think the long-term ramifications. What are we telling this next generation of Christians?
Yeah.
That are coming, that come along. What are we saying that hey, as soon as COVID gets there, all this other church stuff that that Bible that you read tells you how to do, man, as long as everything is cool, then you can do it. But when things are not cool, you do your thing.
Yeah.
We have to do what everybody else does, and I'm sorry, we're all going to die. Yeah. I don't know if you know that. Yeah. But it matters how you live and how you die.
On average. Yeah. So I tell my kids, they've heard me say this in the sermon. You've probably heard me say it when I've preached on different sermons. On average, stats, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics was Mark Twain's kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Stats can be twisted to say anything you want, but I think there's one stat that good. On average, 1 out of every 1 person dies. Mm-hmm. Now you have to average that. You have to factor that in, because like in the Old Testament, you got like Elijah taken up in the whirlwind. But then you got Lazarus who died twice. Sure. So that averaged out. Elijah died 0, but Lazarus twice. So on average, 1 out of every 1 person dies. That's pretty reliable, like you said. So we got to face that, and we got to also live. More importantly, we've not got to face death. It's not that we face death without fear. We've got to face life with a hope that will infect other people. They're like, man, I don't know what they have, but I want what those people have. And I guess my thought that came to me this week with the church is, what have we done as the church that made any non-believer say to us, man, I don't know about what everyone else is saying, but I want what that group of people has.
Oh, you know what we've done?
That's my question.
Well, you people are obedient, but anybody can be obedient, right? But what's special about you? What's different about you? What makes you different? I mean, you preach about this hope that you have. Well, how's that working out right now? And again, I'm not saying that we, like as you said, that we need to be unwise. I'm not saying that, to heck with it all. We're just going to meet and, no mask, no social distancing, none of that. I'm not saying any of that. But golly,
Yeah.
we went to one of our nieces had a birthday party out here, and we did the drive past, and then we got out of the car and gave her gifts. And my wife said to me, she said, for a minute when she came to hug me, I hesitated. I didn't want to hug her. And she said, "How ridiculous is that? How ridiculous is that?"
Yeah, this is impacting our psychology, man, and the church needs to be aware that, this is going to be problematic moving forward. Not because of COVID. This is not a fault of COVID. This is a part of our response to it, is what's conditioning us to think this way and to act this way and to be this way. We can't be like the newspapers that blame everything on COVID or, have a political agenda. We've got to be careful. That sort of leads us to this last question I want to kind of get in before we get towards our end here. This kind of question came up in some of the stuff I was reading this week, but can the church move forward in unity without letting politics divide us? Because it seems like everybody, in the church, of course, has their political favorite candidates, Democrat, Republican, or whatever. And that debate is so vitriolic and so wild. It's not even funny. It's even turned into, well, if you want to gather together, well, actually, I have a quote from John Owen I want to look at, but look at this thing from the Washington, the AP. This really got my goat, not just because of the content I thought was interesting, but the way they framed the discussion is interesting. They said, while the White House looks ahead at reopening houses of worship, most Americans think in-person religious services should be barred or allowed only with limits. So right there in the thing, they bias the reason. If you believe in reopening churches, you take the side of Donald Trump. That's what they're telling their readers.
Right.
So if Donald Trump wants to do it, that's like their signal to half the population that, oh, well, you can't be for it because Donald Trump is for it. So
that's a great point. But it's a great point because I think, and I was going to write this somewhere earlier, that we've declared what our real religious convictions are. They're largely political, and our denomination is whatever party we happen to belong to. Now, that isn't to say that every Christian frames their life that way or their religious life that way, but largely in our country, that's where we've ended up. I mean, there's a book called "To Change the World" by Richard Davison Hunter, and he embarks on a way in which the church ought to act in framing and changing the world. And but he also traces the history back to the early 80s and the preachers in the early 80s who just ensconced themselves in the political world, and how their ensconcement and the rest of the Christians who followed after them, how that's affected the view of the church. Now, it may have inevitably ended up that way, but I think right now we're reaping the seed that we've sown.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting. It's interesting going back to that article from the AP. Here's what they say. Harris, a Methodist, said that until, quote, either there is a vaccine or if we know that things have calmed down, I am not comfortable going back to the actual building. And then it says, just 9% of Americans think in-person religious services should be permitted without restrictions, while 42% think they should be allowed with restrictions.
That's crazy.
And 48% think they should not be allowed at all, the poll shows.
Crazy.
Even among
Americans
who identify with a religion, 45% say in-person services shouldn't be allowed at all. That's half.
Insane. That's insane. Now, if you've listened to the way that they've answered the question, the Constitution forbids them from determining how we ought to worship. All the people who responded are ignorant of the Constitution of the United States of America. It's ignorant.
Yeah.
And then the second point is, why should the government tell tell us how we ought to worship God. What right? Where, the big question in church history is, what does the state have to do with the church? That's
Yeah.
the big question, and we're answering that question. And those people who responded to that in bequeathing the rights of the church to worship to the government have
Yeah.
totally said no. The state is sovereign, and that's what
Yeah.
they just said. The state
Yeah.
is sovereign.
Well,
The
and
state rules.
that's the thing, Leroy. It's like, what does that even mean to say, well, I'm not going back to a building? First, it confuses the gathering with a building. But no matter what, we're going to meet in a building probably, unless you go back to a park, maybe you want to go out to a park or at the beach or something like that. But the point is, we've sacralized that one central worship place to say that that's what worship means.
Mm-hmm.
But 45% of religious people say we shouldn't go back to public worship practice. And that's from people the AP says are religious. So I don't know how they did these stats, but I think what concerns me is they've boiled this down by the framing. And I want everyone, when you go read these articles, look how everything is being framed. They're framing it as a left, Republican versus Democrat issue. They're not framing it as a discussion of, what is the sovereignty of the state, or what are the rights of religious people? What's the right of any just average citizen? They're not looking at it from even what is the right thing, like we've talked about today. What is the healthy thing to do? Because we need religious gatherings for our psychological, emotional, physical, and spiritual health. And what about the suffering? None of this. It's all just the White House wants to reopen them. Therefore, everyone be signaled. If you hate Trump, you have to be opposed to churches reopening, because that's a success for Trump if churches meet again. This is nuts that's even the way this is being framed. And I think pastors need to be very careful, because I've heard this before early on. I haven't heard it recently, at least not this way. But I know that pastors were like really walking on eggshells to not come across as they don't want the media to say, look how those Christians are defying the law. They don't want to have we're afraid of the bad press. We're making decisions based on the public relations side versus a legitimate response. And I'll just give you this quote real quick, and then I get you to jump in. So that's where John Owen comes in. He says, look, the conscience of ministers, like obey your conscience in these things. You cannot be coerced into not meeting based on laws. You can't be coerced to, it's the command of Christ to preach the gospel that we go after. But we want to do it and be peaceable as possible with those in authority. So I get that balance. But my concern is, again, we've gone against being peaceable to bending over backwards because we're worried about the PR. Right. Let me tell you, no matter how we do this, there are those in the press that will characterize the church and Christians as the one at fault for any illness that comes down the road. It doesn't matter. History tells us that's what's going to happen, and recent history tells us that even more. So I think we have to start saying, okay, let's demonstrate respect and nuance and subtlety in our approaches, and respond to science, but not be controlled by the fear of what press is going to say or by what the fear of the politicians say. We are sovereigns on our own in a kingdom of our own, and we've got to make those decisions as God leads us to do it.
Oh, that's excellent. I mean, I agree with that. I don't really have anything more to add, because that's exactly what happens. I really don't. I mean, you've taken the words directly out of my mouth. I did. I stole them. I just think that it's bigger. It's bigger than we think it is. It's bigger. It's about our expression to the world. Yeah. On one level, we want to be good citizens of this earth, but we're not primarily citizens of this earth.
Yeah.
There's a bumper sticker that's been going on for a lot of years that said "Not of this world." Well, are we really not of this world? And if we aren't, then that means that we have citizenship in the kingdom that cannot be shaken, cannot be taken away from us. Amen. Ever. And we ought to live by the rules of that kingdom rather than the one that is passing away and perishing.
Yeah. I think I'll close with this, just my own thought, is that, look, we've got to realize that choosing not to meet may do more damage than choosing to meet. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm sort of leaning to at this point.
Hmm.
If our concern is really the health and the welfare of not just our congregation but our nation, and globally speaking, to be honest, then I think we're at the point where not meeting is doing more harm than good in every definition of that word.
Yep.
And yes, we have to be concerned. Okay, if we meet together, how are we doing so in a way that shows that we're not, wrongly thumbing our nose at the authority? But at the same time, if we're worried about our reputation, there's also the reputation that we get as being a people no different from this world around us, and the choices we make. We're sheltered in place and just as afraid as the next guy, or the next gal, and so I'm concerned about that as well. So I think if we're only factoring COVID into this for those questions of what's morally right or what is my obligation, what is my duty, we're letting the world and the news frame that debate. COVID is not the only factor in answering those questions that we're all trying to answer. And so we have to make sure that we're being, have a clear conscience that we've really investigated this, and we're not just letting somebody else tell us what the narrative has to be. That's all I'm thinking of.
And that's a fair point. And and pastors, they may go through this thoughtful process and end in a different place. They have to stand before God.
Fully good, yeah.
And they have to, and we don't judge them. They stand before God.
I wouldn't.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, I just think that for those of us who are interested in what happens with that next generation and what happens to the church going forward, these are questions that we need to wrestle with, and we need to have good answers.
Amen.
That's where I come from.
All right. Well, hey, we're going to wrap it up here. Thanks for everyone who joined in. I know I got a few questions and comments that came up. Appreciate that. And I shared a few of those on the screen as we went. But I will have, after this, again, at morethancake.org, I will have this video is archived on YouTube, but on the post, I'll have links to all these articles. I've also got about 3 or 4 links to some guidelines for reopening that have come out of here from that was sent out to a bunch of pastors and folks out here. So I've got links to some PDFs and some other stuff about this. And to be honest, it's funny. The guidelines are just wash your hands, make sure it's clean, make sure children's care workers or whatever. Sure. It's just stuff, to be quite frank, most of it you should do every week in any kind of large gathering anyway. But it's really, the more I read these guidelines, the more I realize, man, it's time. We're ready in some way.
They're not really telling us anything new.
Yeah, we're really ready to move forward. We cannot live in fear anymore. And so all those things will be posted. So hopefully people will check it out and will join us next time, hopefully next week when we get together. All right?
All right.
Good for you, brother?
Good. Excellent.
All right. Peace out, my friend.
All righty.